Welcome to the Breaking News Bears podcast. I'm your host, Chris Capone. Joining us on my co-host once again, Evan Davis. And the hot stove has been cooking in recent days. There have been so many deals, it seems like not after a single move for any first baseman after the first couple of weeks of free agency, almost all the top options are signed to new clubs. Most notably, Paul Goldschmidt, Christian Walker to Houston, Nathaniel Lowe being traded to the Nationals, and Josh Naylor being traded to the Diamondbacks, along with some other starting pitcher moves, such as Sean Manaea returning to the Mets. Walker Buehler finding a new home in Boston after he beat them in 2018. The Phillies trading for Jesus Luzardo and so much more. There's so many more things to talk about free agency coming up in the next couple of days. What are the most impactful moves? Are the Mets done free agency now? What does this mean for the remaining starting pitchers like Corbin Burns and Jack Flaherty? What does this mean for Pete Alonso? There's so many moves to talk about. But first, Evan, I'll ask you, in your opinion, what is the most impactful move from the last couple of days?
Yeah, I think when you look at it in a vacuum, I kind of think it's Jock Peterson going to the Texas Rangers. Like, they needed a big bat from the left-hand side. You obviously have Corey Seager, but he's kind of been unreliable in terms of injury concerns. But when he's healthy, he's one of the best left-handed hitters in baseball. And now you get a solid DH in Peterson on a fairly cheap deal where he could slot into that lineup beautifully. And you have your DH for this year and potentially next year as well. This is a guy that is a really solid hitter, and I think he can make a huge impact in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, Jock Peterson had a huge year for Arizona last year as a strict DH, a 2.9 WAR, career high for him, 23 home runs, 64 RBIs driven in. He didn't really have the RBI numbers, but he's still one of the best DHs available out there. And, a 908 OPS, he just absolutely mashes baseballs. He gets hit by pitches a lot. He led the National League in hit by pitches, 23 home runs, 17 doubles, a triple, like I said, but a triple in Arizona is a lot easier to hit than a triple in Texas, not Texas Stadium, Globe Life Field. Okay, one of the interesting things about the offseason so far is the first base market, and now obviously with Paul Goldschmidt signing with the Yankees, this is kind of like a low risk, high reward deal for the Yankees. Um, you know, Obviously Paul Goldschmidt won the MVP in 2022, had a huge year, and then the last couple years, obviously Father Time is undefeated now. Uh, and now signing with the Yankees on a 1 year, $12.5 million deal. What do you make of this, and like, what do you make of it for the Yankees right now?
I think it's an interesting situation because the Yankees, again, like a 1 year deal, we thought maybe they could go after Pete Alonso. Vladdy did say he didn't want to play for the Yankees, but maybe for 500 million, that could change his mind. Who knows? I think when you look at it, they were kind of just like, we're not going to pay Pete Alonso the 100+ million he wants. Outside of that, I thought they might have gone after Christian Walker, but apparently they didn't want to pay the draft pick that comes with Christian Walker since he was qualified, offered by the Diamondbacks. So then you go back to your next best option and a guy like Paul Goldschmidt who raked against lefties, and he had a pretty solid second half to his season. So I think when you look at what Brian Cashman and what ownership wanted, and maybe even what Aaron Boone wanted, was like, let's get a cheap flyer onto first baseman. Maybe a new situation, a winning environment will revitalize his career. And at the end of the day, 1 year, 12.5 million in this economy for baseball is really nothing. Like it's almost, you could almost consider it like they got him for free. I know as crazy as it sounds, but like when you're the Yankees and you have all this money, and when the qualifying offer was nearly $10 million less than this, and Carlos Santana, who's around that same age, gets 10 million as well. Like it's pretty cheap deals for what could be like an every other day starter, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's a really low risk, high reward move for the Yankees, getting somebody like Paul Goldschmidt, who, if he can even somewhat put up similar numbers to what he did in 2022, it's a W for them, like a huge win for them. Um, but obviously he is 37, turning 38. Like it is a hard thing to come back from, especially like I said, Father Time is undefeated.
Hmm.
Um, Moving on, we could talk about Jock Peterson, big move for the Rangers, moving up for them. But another big move is with Jock Peterson going over to the Texas Rangers, it's a really big move for them getting a big left-handed power bat and now really fortifying that lineup after, there's really big inconsistencies health issues with the Rangers lineup this whole year, and that's really what took them out of uh, postseason contention really so early. Just the amount of injuries they had had to their entire lineup, and some starting pitching issues as well. But now you trade Nathaniel Lowe over to Washington, you get left-handed pitcher Robert Garcia, but you also sign Jock Peterson now, who can give you kind of thump in your lineup. What do you make of this? Both deals for the Rangers.
Oh, I mean, it's a beautiful contract for the Rangers to get Jock Peterson just below the qualifying offer and to give him a player option as well. And I think when you look at it, where the Texas Rangers really lack in terms of depth, I think it's fair to say is left-handed hitting. You obviously have Corey Seager, but I mean a huge reason why the Dodgers didn't want to re-sign him for that big of a ticket was because of his injury concerns, and we've seen that in every season, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, with the Texas Rangers. So now you bring in a guy like Jock Peterson, who I mean, it's not like a very high accomplishment, but to be your everyday DH, like I'm not saying like whatever. But when you look at it, like this is perfect. And you have Evan Carter, who kind of struggled. It was a little bit of an underwhelming season from him. That's another left-handed hitter at your disposal. But outside of that, you're working with a very heavy right-handed bat lineup. And now you can kind of even it out where, you'll probably have Marcus Simeon and then you'll have Corey Seager. Then you could throw in maybe a Josh Young to be your third hitter. And then you put Jock Peterson at your four spot. It just also makes your lineup deeper. And to your point, even as we were saying with like Adolis Garcia, obviously he had 25 home runs, 85 RBIs last year, but the OPS was pretty horrid, and so was his batting average. So yes, he did have 25 home runs, 85 RBIs, but it didn't feel like a very impactful 24 home runs when you look at it because of a 684 OPS in his WAR from 4.2 in 2023 dipped all the way to just point 0.4, which is the lowest in his career statistically when he's had a full season.
The Rangers and now the like trading Nathaniel Lowe to
Yeah,
the Washington Nationals. That was one of the things we were talking about with Pete Alonso to potentially go to the Nationals
yeah,
as a team that might be looking to spend money and try to add to their lineup. I think Nathaniel Lowe going to the Nationals is just a perfect fit for them.
yeah.
Nathaniel Lowe's still only 29 years old, and he's another one of those guys that dealt with injuries this year, missed 22 games. Uh, but he's still a really solid piece to this to any team that he goes to. He's around a 3 WAR guy, won a Gold Glove, won a Silver Slugger, was massive for them in their postseason run,
Mhm.
uh, winning the World Series.
Yeah,
It's a really big situation for him to, end up moving, going to uh going to Washington now. It's a
yeah.
really, really good move for them, getting somebody like who still has another year after this next year
Mm.
available for the Nationals. They get to really see and kind of move their timeline ahead forward. It's a really interesting move for the Nationals.
Yeah, I really like this move for the Nationals because he kind of fits within their timeline, which is something that we were looking at. Like, as you mentioned, only 29 years old. He just turned 29 during the season. And when you look at it, like, 140 games played. That tells you pretty reliable. The year before that, 161. The year before that, 157. The year before that, 157. Like, this is a guy that could be in your lineup every single day. And he's a very, very solid first baseman. You also get a left-handed bat, 16 home runs, 69 RBIs. Nice. 762 OPS as well. Like, it's a very, very solid ad. And when you look at the Washington Nationals, like we've been screaming this entire offseason, you need a first baseman. You need a first baseman. Obviously, they had Joey Meneses there, but with him not really doing well, he had a 593 OPS last year, like really wasn't doing much for them. He's 32 years old. You get younger, you get better at first base. Now you're talking about a little bit more formidable of an infield with Nathaniel Lau, Luis Garcia Jr., Nick Senzel at third, and then CJ Abrams over there at shortstop. You're working with a lot. And you also have, I'm sorry, Nick Senzel's not at third base anymore. I apologize. He's done. But when you look at this team and you have a ton of options, especially young options, like it's a great ad for the Nationals. But also when you look at it from the Texas Rangers perspective, Robert Garcia is nasty. Like, have you, like, his baseball
Yeah.
savant page is nasty. Like, this is a guy last year who had 75 strikeouts in 59 and two-thirds innings. He had a 4.22 ERA, but had an expected ERA at 2.53. His off-speed stuff is really good. He's got that changeup and slider mix. He strikes out nearly 30% of his batters, doesn't walk a ton either, doesn't give up a ton of hard contact either. Like, this is a phenomenal ad for the Texas Rangers too, because when you look at their bullpen, yes, it's Kirby Yates. They have Jose Leclerc as well, but and Josh Spores, but like you needed another guy, and you also needed a left-handed reliever. You know, they tried that with Aroldis Chapman. I get they won a World Series. It didn't work out. Like, let's just call a spade a
Yeah.
spade. It didn't work out. Now you get a guy in Robert Garcia who's under team control for the next 3 seasons, including this one. Like, this is a great, great return. And I just think, it's easier for them to kind of figure out first base. They have options. So why not get a really underrated or under the radar type reliever in return?
Yeah. It's a really good move for them. Just getting both, I think both teams really move out with like feeling positive in this deal. I don't think the Rangers were really thinking of extending Nathaniel Lowe just because of the amount of money they already have invested in this team,
Yeah.
um, with obviously Simeon, Seager, and even guys
DeGrom.
like Scherzer and DeGrom that were making so much. Now, obviously, Scherzer's a free agent. But you had so much money invested in this team, and you won the World Series. Like, I feel like a lot of the money that you had already spent is kind of worth it now.
Yeah.
Um, so making a trade like trading Nathaniel Lowe, first basemen aren't the hardest position to find.
Well, they have Jake
Um,
Berger now.
yeah. Um, that's what I'm saying. It's not the hardest position to find. You can find somebody who's solid at first base pretty easily in the MLB level.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think it's a really interesting move for them just to for the Nationals perspective, just to, move their timeline ahead forward. I think the Nationals really want to try and do better this year.
Yeah.
And they have a really young nucleus. Adding these kinds of complementary pieces that can, provide around like 20 home runs a season. It's a
Mhm.
really good option for them, better than Joey Gallo, like who can
Mhm.
provide you 20 home runs, but also only hits for a 150 batting average.
20 home runs on 25 hits.
Yeah. But over a 35 game span, or not even
Yeah.
35, over a 80 game span, he'll give you
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think like with regards to what else has happened, obviously, the last thing we'll talk about, uh Sean Manaea, his move to the Mets coming back. I felt like it was a really good move for him, just going back to the team, um, that he kind of, really solidified himself with. He's now out there making 25 M's per year. It's a really good deal for him, really good deal for the club. He was so solid last year and so big for them postseason time. It's
Yeah.
just I feel like it's a really good move for the Mets.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, like he was a very, very solid pitcher. There's nothing that really wows you about Sean Manaea in that first half of the season. But then when he changed his pitching stride and his pitching stance, where he kind of embodies Chris Sale now, like his off-speed stuff is nasty because it just keeps moving and moving and moving, and it makes it very difficult for lefties. I mean, he dummied Shohei Ohtani in the playoffs, like made him look foolish, which is pretty hard to do with on a 50-50 guy, but he was somehow able to do it. Now, you might talk about age. He's 32 years old. You definitely saw in his last start of the season against the Dodgers where he kind of got exposed. His arm was giving out. But again, it was a very long season. He was very reliable. He pitched 181 innings in the regular season, probably close to 200 innings overall. So I don't blame him. And he was very solid, a whip close to one. And again, like what you see is what you get with Sean Manaea, and it's a very solid pitcher that really utilizes that sinker sweeper mix with also a little bit of four seam in there. Kind of started using his slider a little bit more, but when you look at it, like he's got a fastball that's pretty solid in that 92, 93 range, and the slider at 85, which is like that just makes it so difficult to hit the slider, especially with the sinker there as well. Like it's a very good ad for the Mets and a team that really needed to shore up starting pitching.
Yeah, I think it's a really good team for them or a really good deal for them because, yeah, like you said, they really needed. Um, starting pitching. They had Clay Holmes as their number two starter lineup for the season. Obviously, is not going to work for this team. Um, but yeah, now you have it going on with you're going into next year and you have one of your guys back. Another one of the guys that they should be looking at bringing back, Jose Quintana is another uh
Hmm.
very solid option. He was really big for them
Yeah.
in the postseason for the Mets, and he's a guy that should, really consider going back. Obviously, 35 years old. Uh, it would just be very. I think the Mets really need to move like that. Like bring back Jose Quintana and be kind of like your third, fourth starter right now. It'd be a
Hmm.
really, really solid deal for him.
Absolutely. I agree. Like they if they bring back Quintana, like that would be great and it would make their rotation. Now you're really talking about a solid one with Holmes, Quintana, Manaea. Do they get Sasaki? Who knows?
Yeah, and like you said, it's a good deal for him as well. I thought he would have had to maybe have taken a pay cut just to go back to the Mets because they still have aspirations of re-signing Pete Alonso, I believe. So it's really weird to, uh, see that he took such a good deal, and it looks like that's like probably one of the best options that they got for him. Uh, and speaking of the Mets, you know, there's still a lot of things to be said about what they're doing in free agency. Uh, Obviously, Pete Alonso is still out there. Are there any aspirations of him going back to the Mets? Like how much money would a contract for him look like? Uh, but just before I go into that, a lot of the other first basemen have already found homes. Christian Walker signing with Houston, and that could have been an option for Pete Alonso. There was a potential thought of maybe the Yankees go and take Pete Alonso from the Mets as kind of reparations for taking Juan Soto from them. Uh, there's just a lot to say about, a lot of the first basemen that's still available are on the older side or just aren't that good. Justin
Yeah.
Turner, he's 40. Ty France, he's a bum. Like there are still a lot of free agents still out there, and I don't know. It's really weird to see, what else is still available for a guy like Pete Alonso. And I think he might end up just re-signing with the Mets, but it really depends on how big the deal is going to be.
Yeah, and like he had Alonso had that 5 year, $125 million contract offer from the Mets, and I don't think he's going to get to that number anymore. Just the way that the market is trending, like the Mets have the leverage on Alonso at this point. Now that Washington has a first baseman, Houston has a first baseman. You look at all these great teams that already have first baseman, and it doesn't include Pete Alonso. Does Seattle go after him? I don't know. I don't think that that's a team that like really would target Pete Alonso. So I don't know what they do, but for Alonso, I think he really shot himself in the foot because Scott Boras, his agent, told him like you probably want to take this deal. Like Scott Boras clients usually don't hit free agency, so I think this is a bad move by Pete Alonso.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just like looking at it, that's really the only team that would kind of need him at this point. It's uh you look at like the Mariners don't really have anything. Like they used Ty France, who's awful for half the year, and then they replaced him with Justin Turner, who's 40. Like there isn't that's probably really the only team right now that's looking for a first baseman of Pete Alonso's caliber, but they aren't really a heavy spending team. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, that's the thing is that like Luis Castillo's contract of close to 135 million was like the most that they've ever spent on a player. So you're gonna tell me that they're all of a sudden now gonna spend another $125 million on Pete Alonso when it's even been reported that they're trying to trade Luis Castillo? Like it just doesn't make sense to me. So for the Mets, like it's also like, are you waiting for Vladdy? Like, is that another thing where it's like you really are you waiting for him, but in the back pocket, veteran options on 1 year deals such as Paul Goldschmidt and Carlos Santana are now gone. So you're kind of at an impasse. Pete Alonso's kind of at an impasse. Like a decision's going to have to be made eventually, but I think it's got to be made sooner rather than later for Alonso's case because let's say the Mets end up wanting to move Mark Vientos to first base and then they bring in Alex Bregman. Like then what happens to Pete Alonso?
Yeah, and it's just a real weird situation going on with the Mets right now because, you know, you sign Juan Soto and it's a 15-year deal. Uh, but there is that opt-out after the fifth year. And you want to be able to contend right away, but also you want to be able to go contend in the long run too, later down the line. So I get not wanting to, maybe overspend on Pete Alonso right now when there could potentially be, as you said, an option for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. next offseason. And if you were able to pair both of them up with Lindor and the rest of the team as you already have set, that's probably one of the it would be years and years of domination by the Mets just on the offensive side of the ball. Defense and pitching, whole nother story. But offensive side of the ball, they could be putting up like 8 runs a game just by having those three plus Mark Vientos. Like it would be like the instead of the Bronx Bombers, it would
Yeah,
be the Queens something. I don't know.
we'll figure it out. We'll figure out
Yeah.
the trademark name.
That,
But
that
yeah,
that's for their marketing department to figure out.
it's just I really don't know what's going on with Pete Alonso there. But when you look at the other deals, like Christian Walker, 3 years, 60 million to the Houston Astros, like that is a perfect deal for both Walker and the Astros because I've been saying this, I feel like for the last few years, is like Christian Walker's one of the most underrated not third baseman, first baseman in the MLB. He's really good defensively. He gives you very solid power numbers, which you don't really see a lot from first baseman. And for him, Houston's perfect. He doesn't really have to play in a very competitive division. He's got the Crawford boxes out in left field. I mean, he's more of like a dead center to pull hitter, but he has that to his advantage as well. And when you look at it, like it's a perfect mesh for him where he could just immediately come in and be the starter right away, make a huge impact. He's one of the best defenders at first base. He won a gold glove last year. This is a great get for the Houston Astros. And I feel like Christian Walker kind of undersold his value, but again, when you look at it, you're in Houston, you're in Texas, it's a no state income tax, so you might be making more money than if you went somewhere else. So in the end, he could actually be making more, but in a better situation. But it's very interesting to see the Astros being so aggressive when they trade Kyle Tucker and let go of Alex Bregman.
Yeah, and that's another thing about the their future and what they're doing is so fluid right now that you don't really know what they're really up to, but it's working. Like I feel like the moves that they've made, trading Kyle Tucker, getting Cam Smith from Chicago, you're kind of building towards the future while also contending. But it seems like the AL West is not as it was in years past where it was just really the Astros. The Rangers have, like we said, Jock Peterson have made moves that have fortified their team. They trade Nathaniel Lowe yesterday to the Washington Nationals, but they also continue just to, keep adding to their team. It's really the ALS is going to be very competitive this year. And I think for a multitude of reasons, I think Seattle's going to be a lot better than they were last year. I think even the A's, while they're not
Yeah,
going to be contending for a playoff spot, they're a lot better of a team than they were a couple, like last year or even the year before that. Like I think the A's are putting together a nice solid team that's playing in a minor league ballpark. You never know what's going to happen when a team's playing 81 games in a minor league ballpark.
yeah.
There could be some crazy offensive numbers going on in Sacramento. Uh, but yeah, one of the other moves I wanted to talk about is your baby boy Walker Buehler going over to the Boston Red Sox. I just want to get your opinion on that. We talked about this before too, like a 1 year deal, prove it deal for Walker Buehler. We thought maybe he would go to Cleveland, but it seems like Boston is another one of those teams that needed started pitching, and this kind of takes them out of the red Corbin Burns or Jack Flaherty. What do you
Yeah.
feel about Walker Buehler now?
Well, yeah, I mean, kudos to the Dodgers. He basically just got the qualifying offer from the Red Sox, but they don't have a pick attached, which is why I think it made it so much easier for Walker Buehler to find a home because, or at least for that amount of money as well, because, depending on how much money you give to a player, that's dependent on that in turn is what pick the Dodgers would get in return for Walker Buehler. So when you look at it, yeah, he was really good in the World Series. He was good in the postseason. In the regular seasons where he really struggled, which is why I think the Dodgers were kind of allowing him to go figure it out. He's 30 years old. He gets a 1 year prove it deal with the Boston Red Sox. I mean, the division is going to be tough to pitch in when you got the Yankees, the Blue Jays. I know they're not great offensively, but still. You still are working in the American League. So, look, hopefully it works out for him. Writing was on the wall for a bit that he wasn't going to be a Dodger, and we were content with that. And it was evident when they didn't give him the qualifying offer, but good for him. The Red Sox, they shore up their starting pitching rotation, and yeah, they probably didn't want to pay that much money to Corbin Burns, who's relatively similar in age to Walker Buehler. Obviously, the talent discrepancy, but for a Red Sox team that is trying to build without spending a ton of money, it's a great deal.
Yeah. Last thing to talk about the first base market. I wanted to talk about, Josh Naylor being traded to the Arizona Diamondbacks. You lose Christian Walker, and I don't know how much the Diamondbacks really offered to Christian Walker. And then you make this trade, trading Slade Cecconi uh, for Josh Naylor. Like, I feel like it's a really good lateral move. Now, obviously, Josh Naylor is a free agent after this next year, and that obviously changes a lot of things about what's going on with the first base position over in Arizona. But I do think you could do a lot worse. Uh, of first basemen that were available. You lose somebody like Christian Walker, who's been a staple in your organization for so many years now, Gold Glover, like three times, and now you replace him with Josh Naylor, who had a decent year last year, might have had a better year the year before, where he only hit 17 home runs, but this year, but hit for more average last year. In 2023, I'm talking about. I think getting Josh Naylor is one of the best possible options for Arizona after immediately losing Christian Walker. And you don't
Yeah.
really trade anything because Slade Cecconi wasn't really doing anything in this organization. You know, he was supposed to be a part of this rotation for the Diamondbacks this year and was terrible. So I think getting Josh Naylor, even though it's probably only for a 1 year deal, you can probably extend him for longer. He's still only 27. I think it's a really good move for the Diamondbacks.
Yeah, when you look at what they got back, obviously Josh Naylor is not the defender that Christian Walker is, so you are losing a big piece in that in terms of just your overall defense. But when you look at Naylor offensively, if we just want to look at both of these guys offensively, yeah, he's solid. He doesn't strike out a ton. He walks a little bit. Obviously hitting the 31 homers last year, which is a career high for him. Having a 776 OPS is a huge down turn from what he had in 2023 at 843 OPS. It's kind of interesting to see more home runs, but a lower on base, a lower slug, and a lower OPS. So,
Yeah, lower batting average, like 6 points down in batting average.
yeah. So I think when you look at this, yeah, like the Cleveland Guardians were like, all right, well, we basically just also paid Carlos Santana the same AAV that Josh Naylor has. It's just that Josh Naylor is going to be a free agent next season. So why not get something in return for him and get a very solid defender in Carlos Santana's? But I think when you also look at Slade Ciccone, this was a guy that was kind of just trying to find his own with the Diamondbacks now, obviously with the Guardians, but I think what the Guardians really liked with Slade Ciccone is the fact that he only walked at 5%, but his strikeout percentage was pretty terrible. Like everything else besides his walk rate is pretty terrible. But with the Cleveland Guardians, as long as you have a good walk rate, they'll help you maneuver everything else. So I think what they were thinking is like, let's get a guy with a couple years of control. We'll get a draft pick as well. And we'll also then trade a pretty solid player. But if we don't think we're going to want to retain him, let's just get something in return for him while we can.
Yeah. Last thing I want to talk about from the last couple moves is Jesus Luzardo being traded to Philadelphia for Starlin Cava and Marion Boyd. You know, this is a really big move because people were talking about Jesus Luzardo being traded at the deadline and how bad his value had gone just because he had an off year and then obviously the injury took him out of it. And now he's gonna be a member of the Phillies. He's gonna be around a fourth, maybe fifth starter for that team. You know, and it was a move that people were talking about last year. It was people wanted Jesus Luzardo because of what he had done the last couple of years and is a good lefty pitcher at only 27 years old. So I think although it might be slight of an overpay for Jesus Luzardo, I think the Phillies, you know, they have a good shot at, just making him a fifth starter and taking kind of a pressure off him, where in Miami he was kind of the number two starter.
Yeah, and I think when you look at this, look, I don't really know what to make of it. Jesus Luzardo, when he has had that one healthy season, he was a 200 strikeout pitcher. The only problem is one healthy season, and you trade a really solid prospect in Starlin Caba, who, when you look at MLB.com, the Marlins' top prospects, he already fits into their third best prospect. And I kind of want to focus this more with the Marlins rather than the Phillies because when you look at this for the Marlins, if you look at their top 10 prospects within their system, prospects three, four, five, and six were all guys that they traded for. And when you look, obviously, prospects, you're only looking at potential teams want the real thing. But Starlin Caba, I thought, based on the timeline of Trey Turner, could have been the shortstop of the future for the Phillies once Trey Turner retires, because obviously Turner has what, like 4 or 5 years left on his contract, maybe around that 5 or 6 years left on his contract, somewhere in that time frame. But that kind of aligns perfectly with Starlin Caba because he's only 19 years old. And realistically, when Trey Turner retires, I could be wrong on the contract. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. But regardless, Cobb is going to be around 24, 25 years old. That's when you would want a guy to be in the major leagues. Now, obviously, he has to be major league ready, and maybe something that just really deterred the Phillies in the long run is that Cobb is only 5'9", and you kind of want your shortstops to be a little bit taller just for the height and the vertical leap. But this is a guy that was regarded as one of the best in the 2023 international free agent signing class. And this is a guy, a switch hitter as well at the shortstop position. Now, he didn't bat great at single A, but that was only 26 games. He's also only 19 years old. Jesus Luzardo obviously has years of team control, which is what warranted such a high return. But if I'm the Miami Marlins, like, I'm kind of happy I got off Jesus Luzardo. No disrespect to him, but it's just with all of his injury concerns, you're telling me I get a really, really solid switch hitter that's only 19 years old and that has a ton of potential. He doesn't have the power, but he does have the arm talent and the fielding. He grades out as at his 70 fielder and it's out of 80. So you know he's going to be a great defender. If I'm them, I'd rather at least him know how to defend and we can work on the hitting later.
Yeah, and I think it was a good trade by, I think both trades or both teams get what they want out of it. I think Jesus Luzardo is a good enough pitcher that if he can be a solid 4 or 5 for the Phillies, that's a really good depth piece for their rotation. Where they had Taiwan Walker starting every fifth day and basically giving up 8 runs and then going to the dugout. But now you have Jesus Luzardo who proves to be, I know, hopefully is healthy and can, perform anything better than what Taiwan Walker gave the Phillies last year. Um, but one of the last things that we can talk about is with the starting pitching free agent class still, Corbin Burns and Jack Flaherty are still out there. And seeing these deals, you see Sean Manaea getting 25 mil AAV, Walker Buehler getting the 1 year, basically the qualifying offer.
He got the
You know,
qualifying offer just for
yeah,
Boston.
yeah. Corbin Burns and Jack Flaherty, what's really their options right now? Like to go to places. Like we said, Corbin Burns has been talking with the Jays and the Giants for like weeks now. Nothing's been being finalized or whatever. Nothing closed. But Jack Flaherty, he's a real weird option because everyone thought he would go back to Detroit, and like, why hasn't he by now? Like, what's going on
Yeah,
there?
I think it's with Jack Flaherty, it's like I've heard, or not heard, but like what we've seen on Twitter is like he wants to stay on the West Coast because that obviously he went to Harvard Westlake. He's from the LA area. He's only 29 years old, but it's clear that the Dodgers don't want to re-sign him because if they wanted to, they probably would have already done that. And I just think when you look at Jack Flaherty and the Tigers, like Yeah, I thought that would have made perfect sense, especially that since they signed Alex Cobb too. Like now you have Cobb, Flaherty, and Scooble, and that's not a terrible starting three going into the postseason with Cobb as your three, Flaherty as your two, and then obviously the unanimous Cy Young winner as your one. But maybe that's something that the Tigers don't want to entertain because they have Jackson Jobe coming up and they have a ton of arm talent already. It's like they got Cobb on a pretty cheap deal. And for a mid-level market like the Tigers, who were able to get Jack Flaherty for like 1 year, 14 million, there's reports that he wants to cash in. He wants like $100 million, which, rightfully so. He pitched solid in the regular season and he did a good enough job in the postseason to earn $100 million. I don't think the Detroit Tigers necessarily want to pay that. And with Corbin Burns, like look, I don't know what's going on with Scott Boras clients, but you look at over the last two off seasons, and I'm looking at Jordan Montgomery, Pete Alonso now, Corbin Burns, Blake Snell, even like there's something going on. Like you can't tell me that a team doesn't want Corbin Burns. Like I get he comes with a qualifying offer, but like everyone knew that the Orioles were going to get, they wanted to get at least something back for Corbin Burns. And now that the Red Sox have kind of said that they're not said, but they've made it clear that they're out. Like, if I'm Corbin Burns, like, hear me out. Why not even see what the Houston Astros want to offer? Or, like, I get that the Astros don't want to pay a ton and, like, they're not known for giving five or giving deals above 6 years, which is why Bregman's going to leave. But Corbin Burns has also said, I'll take a lower year, high AAV. Why not go to the Astros? Like that's a team where you can easily get to the World Series because it's a not as competitive division and you're working with a much more polished roster. No shade to the Orioles, but the veterans that are still on the Astros can help galvanize you to winning. And also the division isn't as competitive with all due respect.
Yeah, and there's so many options for him. Like it's not like last year where people are like, well, Blake Snell, I know he won the Cy Young, but like his peripherals and his he walked a lot of people, and that you can kind of, say maybe that's why some people didn't want him. Or you could say, Matt Chapman, uh, you know, his offense or whatever. But it just seems so weird that like the last two off seasons, it's been a long time for these players to get signed when they're clearly worth more than or not clearly worth more, but they should be gone by now. Like Corbin Burns should not be a free agent still. A 30-year-old Cy Young caliber pitcher who just had one of his best seasons. Uh Obviously not his best or not his third best or whatever, but it's still a really good season for any pitcher available still out there on the market. And he still isn't signed. I think Scott Boras takes a lot of time deciding what to do with a lot of these pitchers, but damn, like Corbin Burns should be signed by now. Like it's kind of insane that he hasn't been. He's such a good pitcher, and it's just weird that he hasn't been signed.
Well, here's the thing is like one last thing is I just think Max Fried kind of killed Corbin Burns' value in a way because I don't think people were going into this offseason thinking Max Fried was going to get, what did he get, 8 years, 218 million? Like, that's just ridiculous. Because then now, if I'm Corbin Burns, I'm like, give me 8 years, 250 million. Like, give me closer to 300 million or something like that. Because I'm better than Max Fried and I've done it, I don't have an injury history looming with my shoulder and everything like that. So I think that kind of killed Corbin Burns in negotiations because, and I'm just assuming here based on why, Max Fried was signed like 2 weeks ago and Corbin Burns hasn't heard anything, is like maybe teams were thinking Corbin Burns was going to be the only $200 million pitcher on the free agent market this year because I think guys were, or like maybe teams were thinking Max Fried and Blake Snell would get something pretty similar. Like Snell obviously gets the five for 182. I think maybe people were thinking Fried caught around that as well. But when it shoots up to over 200 million, now Corbin Burns thinks he has all this leverage, but teams are kind of just like, wait, like we didn't expect this to happen. So how do we end up going about it? Because like it's not that Corbin Burns is, old or anything, but He is 30 years old. Like he just turned 30 years old. You know,
Yeah.
I just it's hard with these pitchers to give such long-term deals, which is why I don't understand the Yankees doing it. But for a guy like Corbin Burns, I think he might have to take like a quote unquote bridge deal where it's just that 3-year deal with a higher AAV. But the problem is like a 33-year-old starting pitcher, like now you're just killing the rest of your future.
Yeah. Um, Last thing we could talk about is with the Mets, just a quick little wrap up of everything. Do you believe that they're done in free agency? Do you think this is the roster we're gonna have for the Mets this year? Not like exactly like I feel like there's still gonna be like a lot of smaller moves, but do you think there's a world where they just don't sign Pete Alonso and they just go into this year as is?
I I want to say yes, just because I feel like with how much Pete Alonso has given to that city and everything that he's done for the Mets, like the fact that there isn't like a deal yet is kind of just making me think that Pete Alonso and Scott Boras maybe think he's worth more than he actually is. And although Steve Cohen is worth $20 billion and can afford whatever, evidenced by the ridiculous Juan Soto contract, I still am a believer that in his back pocket, he's thinking Juan Soto, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., like Francisco Lindor. I mean, you talk about LA with all these Japanese players, talk about the Mets with potentially all these guys from the Dominican Republic, like in Puerto Rico, like, we're talking about a potential building block for the future with the Mets. And with given the fact that P. Alonso's entering into his 30s and Vladdy is kind of that similar age as Juan Soto, I feel like it's a valid conversation to have. The only problem is that your backdoor vets that you could have signed are now gone. So that's why it's a little confusing. I think Pete Alonso is going to be a Met at the end of the day, but I I don't know. A part of me also thinks that if he was going to be a Met, why isn't he signed yet?
Ooh, bars at the
Oh,
end
geez, I didn't
there.
even.
He's a poet. He didn't even know it. But yeah, that'll just about do it for this episode of Breaking News Bears. I once again want to thank my co-host Evan Davis. I once again want to thank you guys, the listeners. Free agency is starting to, it really heated up over these last couple of days. We were thinking of doing so many emergency pods for all these deals, but what a way for free agency to keep going. Hopefully next time we come up, hopefully this isn't another saga like last year with Corbin Burns and Pete Alonso kind of
God.
not signing until uh after like middle of January or even February. But yeah, thank you guys once again for listening for another episode of Breaking News Bears.